21st, I'll be with Matilda and the kids somewhere, or as many of the kids as we can gather in one place. I'm not sure where, but I'll work right up until the very end. I mean, I loved being governor so much. I was so grateful for it that I'm going to use every minute of it I can.
Governor Cuomo, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
A programming note, Monday on C-SPAN, a hearing on Medicare claim denials. The House Small Business Subcommittee meets to consider the issue at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 7 Pacific. Monday morning on C-SPAN, R.W. Apple of the New York Times and Michael Barone of U.S. News and World Report join us for a discussion of the latest news headlines. Your calls, faxes, and email messages are welcome, beginning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 Pacific. Next, the Ross Perot Radio Show. Each Sunday night for 1 hour, Mr. Perot shares his views on politics, business, and current events, and takes listener calls. The program originates from AMS Studios in Dallas, Texas, and is heard on stations affiliated with the Tribune radio networks.
Ross Perot, Listening to America, will begin at 7:06 p.m. Central Time.
Good evening. I'm Ross Perot, and it's a privilege to be on C-SPAN tonight. I'm a long-time avid C-SPAN watcher. I watch C-SPAN to get good information. I use information that I get from C-SPAN on this program, believe it or not. C-SPAN, after all the experience I've had on all the different television networks, is the clear winner in terms of ethics and integrity. And it performs an invaluable service in getting good, accurate information to the American people. It's an interesting experience to put a radio show on television. First thing we had to do tonight was really clean up. Normally I show up in work clothes, khakis, and tennis shoes, and you don't have to worry about how things look because nobody can see you. In addition, this is normally just covered with paper and reference material. We've had to clean that up tonight. And you notice we use a large microphone where everybody on television has a little microphone that they put on your tie. Plus the fact I'm normally wearing these big headphones, and I think most of you would think you were talking to an airline pilot if you had those on for an hour. So we went back to the television earpiece. Everybody wonders, how do you put the radio show together? I give a great deal of time each week doing it myself. I have to read a lot, study a lot, check facts a lot, then write a great deal, and then the end product is what goes on the air Sunday night. It's a very interesting experience, but it does take an awful lot of time. This show has one purpose, and that purpose is to provide good information to the American people and also to give the American people a voice. One of the fun parts of radio, and C-SPAN does this too, is the American people have a voice and that you get to call in and say what's on your mind. That's the reason we named our show Listening to America. Please tonight, give us your ideas about how to improve the show. We work every week to make it better. And call us at 1-800-44-PEROT or 1-800-447-3768. We'd love to take your calls during the show tonight. Now, during the breaks, we'll have plenty of time to visit. Couldn't work it out so that we could take your phone calls during the breaks. That would have been fun. So it'll be one-way communication during the breaks, but at least we can visit. We're about to go on the air.
10 seconds.
Is that all right?
Ross Perot, Listening to America. Brought to you in part by FSG International Commodities Broker for all your commodity trading needs.
Good evening, this is Ross. I hope you had a good week and that you're ready for Christmas. It's been a busy week around the world and in Washington. We've got a lot of information to discuss tonight. It's great to be with you again. The President's speech on the tax cut plan this week was accurately summarized by a front-page headline in Friday's New York Times. Here it is. About face by Clinton. After pushing for 2 years to lower the deficit, the President now focuses on lowering taxes. The lead paragraph stated, For the first 2 years of his presidency, Bill Clinton insisted that reducing the federal deficit was his highest priority. Tonight, he completely reversed course. The second paragraph points out that this was done for political reasons. The third paragraph points out that a Republican-controlled Congress won't adopt his plan anyhow. The following paragraphs detail his political strategy involved behind the speech. The New York Times concludes that the president has now opted for the Republican plan. For the past few weeks, we've been forecasting that the president and the Democratic Party would become more conservative in an effort to appeal to the American voters. It looks like it's happening. Let's take a quick look at the president's current approval ratings, because that's what drives what they do in Washington. They will explain why he took this step. President Clinton's job approval ratings have dropped to only 38%. His foreign policy approval ratings have dropped to 36%. His approval ratings on handling the economy are down to 41%. And finally, 66% of all the Democrats want another Democrat to challenge President Clinton in 1996. Follow the money. On every program, I relentlessly urge you to follow the money if you want to understand politics in the USA. Guess what? The Democrats are now out of power, and believe it or not, they're out of money, even though they raised far more money than the Republicans from special interest in the '94 campaign, because the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House before '94. There's your proof that money follows power, not principle. Guess what? The Democrats lost the House and Senate in November. They're now somewhere between $5 and $10 million in debt. They can't raise money. When they control the House and Senate and the White House in '93 and '94, the Democratic National Committee raised $29 million in 1993, $41 million in 1994. That's $12 million more than the previous fundraising record in a non-presidential election year. The Democrats spent $13 million attacking the Republicans' contract with America. The ads obviously didn't work. Clinton and the Democrats will be busy trying to hold fundraisers in December and January. Here's an example. A huge post-election Democratic fundraising dinner was set in California in December. They had to cancel it. Just a few months ago, the Democrats sold out a dinner in California at $25,000 a plate. Times have changed. To make the point clearly that money follows power, take note of the fact that the Republicans collected $9.3 million between October the 20th and November the 29th, and the Democrats were only able to pick up $2.9 million. The old statement, "to the victors belong the spoils," is still true today. The big financial contributors have no serious political beliefs. They invest in power. Until we reform campaign financing, we cannot get rid of these corrupt practices. We'll be covering a lot of information tonight. Please get something to write with. Give us your ideas about how to improve the program. Interestingly enough, we've had several comments that the music should be changed. I've never thought much about the music. Let us know if you don't like it. We'll change it. Give us some ideas about music you'd like. Now that you got me thinking about the music, what about this song? This land is your land. This land was made for you and me. Let me know what you like. Write to us at Post Office Box 10, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Call us tonight. Give us your ideas. Call 1-800-44-PEROT, P-E-R-O-T, dial O, not 0, or call 1-800-447-3768. And now, we'll be back in a minute.
We'll be back after these words on Ross Perot, Listening to America.
Can I talk to the... Get this out of... Get this... We got all the sound cut out here so I could talk to you. You'll see me giving signals here. I'm not directing traffic, but I have to signal the control room when we go to a break. So some of these signals are just part of radio. We'll have a couple of minutes now before we go back on the air. Well, I'm a little confused right now to all you on C-SPAN. I don't know whether you can hear all this advertising noise or not. I'm told you can't. And so if you can't, then we can talk to one another. We'll be covering a lot of different subjects tonight. We'll be talking about updates on Bosnia, the situation in Chechnya, the more and more about the first 100 days and what the strategies will be. And in every possible way, we'll be trying to get out as much information to you as we can. And if you will bear with me for a minute now, I'm going to kind of study and get ready for the next section. And how much time do we have to the next section?
20 seconds.
And we're almost 20 seconds away.
See that for yourself. You're going to also receive the risk disclosure documents, the blue book.
I can't read it.
This blue book will answer all your questions on options trading. It tells you what a call option is, what a put option is, what a strike price is, and so on. And along with that, my latest newsletter on the oil market. Call 1-800-841-6260 for free information on this exciting heating oil market. That's 1-800-841-6260 for free information. This is Harold Siegel wishing you a profitable day.
Tonight's program is dedicated to police and law enforcement officers who are out on the streets around the clock with their lives on the line for all of us. They are wonderful, talented, brave, dedicated people. We're fortunate to have them serve us in these high-risk jobs. We also thank their families who share the risk. Tonight we'd like to honor a fine police officer who was killed in the line of duty his week, Senior Corporal Tom Bond. I urge you to remember Officer Bond and his family in your prayers. We've also had a great tragedy in North Korea. One of our helicopters crossed the 38 parallel and was shot down by the North Koreans. Chief Warrant Officer David Hyman of Clarksville, Tennessee was killed. Chief Warrant Officer Bob Hall of Brooksville, Florida is alive and reportedly uninjured. He is still being held by the North Koreans. Never forget, our fighting forces put their lives on the line for us. All we have to do back here at home is make sure we do our jobs as informed citizens to make sure that everything that happens here is in the best interest of our great country. Please remember Warrant Officers Hyman and Hall and their families in your prayers tonight and on Christmas Day. They're our heroes. We've spent a lot of time talking about our country's problems. Their patriotism and love of country should inspire us all. And now let's go to the news update. First, we'll start with the middle-class tax plan, the big news of the week. Now, both the Democrats and Republicans are competing feverishly to present plans to cut taxes on the middle class. Remember, when they present a tax cut of $60 billion, that's $60 billion over 5 years. They never make that clear. Even less clear is how they're going to cut spending by that amount to offset the loss. Let's look at the impact on the typical taxpayer. A $20 billion tax cut has little or no impact on the economy. It's 0.3% of our gross national product. It's 1/7 of General Motors' annual revenues. A $50 billion tax cut over 5 years would reduce taxes about $145 a year per taxpayer. That's less than $1 a day. If interest rates increase 1/4%, any tax cuts to a family would be eliminated by higher monthly mortgage payments and credit card payment increases. The first 100 days should be interesting. It's important for the people to understand that the tax cuts being proposed will have little impact on our lives. The good news is that both parties are focused on the middle class and small businesses for the first time. I wonder why. You know why. The independent middle class swing vote shook the earth in November, and now Washington is listening. Not saying they're doing intelligent things, but at least they're listening. In the meantime, the federal debt keeps on growing because they have no plans to cut spending. Let me give you a quick history of income tax. As we consider these tax plans, let's study the history of our income tax in the USA. There are lessons to be learned. The first income tax was passed in 1861 to pay for the Civil War. It expired in 1872. It was passed again in 1894, but the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional in 1895. Then we got the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which was ratified in 1913. At that time, the income tax only applied to the very wealthy. Less than 1% of the American people paid any income tax. Believe it or not, the per capita income in the U.S. in 1913 was $333, and the first $3,000 was exempt from taxes. Nobody paid any taxes except the top of the poll. In 1992, the situation had completely reversed itself. Per capita income had risen to $20,000. The personal exemption was only $2,050. Everybody was paying taxes. In 1944, the highest bracket was a 94% tax bracket on all income over $500,000. In 47, total federal income tax collections took only 9.5% of personal income. In 1990, 112 million income tax returns were filed, representing about 90% of our population. Lessons learned? What seemed like a small tax on the rich in 1913 had grown over time into a giant tax on the middle class. The unanswered question, What are the spending cuts? Now then, let's go to the Kerry Commission. In case you're wondering why neither party wants to discuss where the spending cuts are coming from, let's look at the work of the Kerry Commission. It was set up as a condition for getting Senator Bob Kerry's deciding vote on the Clinton economic plan. The purpose of the commission was to find ways to cut government spending. An indicator of just how interesting the first 100 days is going to be is the fact that the Kerry Commission, after 10 months of work, could not agree on any specific proposals to slow the cost of Social Security, Medicare, or other government benefit programs. Senator Kerry summed it up by saying this commission could not reach an agreement on the details of a plan. It expired this week. It accomplished nothing. Senator Kerry will not seek an extension of the panel's life. Some of the numbers published by the commission tell the whole story, and we'll get back to those in a minute.
We'll be back after these words from your local stations.
Yeah, Chris is, but I don't have one up yet.
All right, Jay, let's punch up Chris to start it off in the segment, all right? Line 3.
Okay, now all of you who are watching on C-SPAN, I've got this panel here in front of me with all the callers. We'll start taking calls, and our first one will be from a man in Santa Rosa, California, who wants to talk about job cuts in the middle class. His name is Chris. And in the meantime, I'm going to finish up this little segment I'm doing now, and one of the things I'll be talking about is how Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security have grown. If you look, Social Security is now $300 million a year. It will grow to $523 million a year in the next 10 years. Medicare is $190 million a year, billion a year, excuse me, these are billions, and it grows to $435 billion by the year in the next 10 years. Medicaid is now $100 billion a year. It grows to $250 billion. So that's $223 billion increase on Social Security, $245 billion increase on Medicare, and $150 billion increase on Medicaid. You put all that together, that's over $600 billion a year in increases coming up, and nobody has even the foggiest idea about how to bring it under control because the American people don't want them to touch those three big ones, and that's where all the big increases are coming from, right there. We've got to get into that and face it.
About 45 seconds.
One other little phenomena that while we just have 45 seconds, this just takes a minute to show you this one. This shows what happens when you mismanage your government. Here's a 1930 dollar bill. It was worth $1.
That's 30.
Today it's worth 9.9 cents. It's not how many dollars you make, it's what your dollars will buy. 1930 dollar bill is worth 9.9 cents today. We've got to start running our government in a proper way. Flip this over now and we'll go back to our radio audience.
Chris is ready for you when you want to go on.
I'm going to button up on the Kerry Commission. Now we'll go back to the findings of the Kerry Commission. In 1994, Social Security cost $300 billion a year. 10 years from now, in the year 2004, it'll cost $523 billion a year. That's an increase of $223 billion each year. In 1994, Medicare cost $190 billion. In the year 2004, it'll cost $435 billion. That's an increase of $245 billion. In 1994, Medicaid cost $100 billion. In the year 2004, excuse me, it will cost $250 billion. That's an increase of $150 billion. The increase in cost for all of these combined in the year 2004 will be $618 billion over 1994's cost. They had real work to do. They ducked. They didn't do it. Senator Simpson of Wyoming, a Republican member of the commission, summed it all up. He said, inaction by this commission is a willful decision to consign our children and grandchildren to misery and bankruptcy. All right, now let's go to Chris in California. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how you doing, Russ?
Terrific.
I got a thing here, a business magazine from my alma mater last week, and there's a comment in there that scared me. It said, this is a quote from a professor at the school. He said, there have been 3.5 million jobs lost among the Fortune 1000 companies recently. Now, how are we going to stop the hemorrhaging with this going on?
Well, the first thing
think of any type of way we could have maybe a social welfare or labor tax in this country to prevent this from going on any further?
Our basic problem is the desire to take the jobs around the world. We sent 2 million jobs to Asia, manufacturing jobs to Asia in the 1980s. We've sent a huge number of jobs to Mexico already. We continue to sending jobs down there. We just signed GATT. As long as big business wants to go to the cheapest labor in the world, we have a problem. You put your finger right on the cancer. We can never balance the budget and pay down the debt unless we keep the middle class at work and have a growing, expanding economy here inside the borders of the USA. We don't collect taxes from Chinese workers, as you well know. Okay, now then, excuse me, I can't read tonight. Let's go to Greg in Boca Raton, Florida. How are you, Greg?
Hi, Ross. Happy holidays. I'd like to make a comment about the tax proposal. I thought they were a joke, and I would like to ask you a question. Do you think that the Congress is starting class warfare with these tax cuts and to try to take our mind off of Washington?
I think they just think I think we ought to put up a sign that says we're dumb, but we're not stupid, because they have to conclude we're totally stupid not to figure out what they're doing. For example, and I'm going to be covering this in more detail later on, if what they did in 1993 was brilliant, and that was increase taxes, then how, less than 2 years later, can it be brilliant to cut taxes? It's like a 180-degree course reversal, and yet everybody in the media and what have you is basically just sort of rolling the drums and saying, this is wonderful. It has nothing to do with anything except trying to pander to the middle class, the independent voters, and the hardworking Americans. There's a better way to do it, and that is create an environment where we can create jobs here in the good old USA. Let's go to Mike in Richmond, Virginia.
Good evening, Ross.
Hey, Mike.
You know, I just have a short comment I'd like to make. I was watching the Jim Hightower show the other day on C-SPAN, and in Richmond, Virginia, we don't get much talk radio. We're pretty isolated. But I heard something on there that I just have to have the answer to. The way I understood it is that half of our tax money is spent on the Pentagon, and they refer to it as the great sacred cow, and that there's not going to be any tax cuts there. I didn't go to college, and I'm not sure what the Pentagon all involves, but it just seems to me that half of the money going to any one particular source is too much. And I would just like an explanation to this. If you have any thoughts on it, that would be good.
Interestingly enough, the Pentagon is one of the slower growing phases compared to some of these other programs, and I think to come up with a number that says 50%, you've got to take an interesting approach in terms of what part of the tax money you're talking about. You're certainly not talking about all the taxes that come in, because we get a little over $1 trillion a year coming in. Right now, the Pentagon's on a cutback. We've got airplanes that don't have the necessary equipment, don't have the fuel, the pilots are not getting the basic flying time. One of the things historically that governments have done fairly well is run national defense. It's when they get beyond national defense and the basic blocking and tackling that they tend to get in trouble. Now then, let's go to John in Boston.
Merry Christmas, Ross.
How are you, John?
Well, it's a great pleasure to speak to you, and obviously a great honor as well. I'm an American. That's my problem, in terms of the taxes. And it's like, this tax cut for the middle class is really aimed at about a third of the middle class taxpayers who have families. And it's really like an extra cup of coffee a day. It really is a joke. But I tell you, I wish that you would run for president. We have a flick in the White House now, and they're shooting at him, of course. And just to think someone out there loose has pumped bullets into the White House. But you, if you could do it, even if I have as much disdain for the Democrats, Republicans as you do, but if that's what it takes to get you into the Oval Office, Ross, consider running as a Republican, because we need you in there to replace this guy that's there now. And I just pray to God, if you can't get the nomination as a Republican, then maybe next time perhaps run as an independent again. I'd love to see you in there.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll be back after these words on Ross Perot, Listening to America.
Homeowners, if your house needs to be painted next year, don't...
Okay,
yeah.
You can get rid of John from Boston. Punch up line 1,
Okay.
David Modesto.
And now back to C-SPAN for a few minutes. We're on a break again. To me, the most fun part of the program is when the callers call in and you hear the wisdom from grassroots America. One of the things that really impresses me is how much they know. And when we get into some of these really technical problems that we're dealing with in Congress, people call in that I guarantee you know a whole lot more about what's going on than some of those folks casting the votes. You may remember on GATT that someone said they'd pay $15,000 to each congressman's favorite charity that would swear that he had read Only one person came in. He had read GATT. he was for it before he read it, but then he changed his mind after he understood it. So that was an interesting phenomenon, but only one person in the whole Congress came in to get a $15,000 contribution to charity.
1 minute. Coming back in a minute. You can start with the prompter.
We'll have an interesting segment coming up on some of these military operations around the world tonight that I think you'll find interesting. Got some interesting things coming up if we don't run out of time on cocaine dealing coming out of Mexico. There's a huge new drug cartel in Mexico that I want to make sure you know about. While the politicians keep on talking about reducing spending, government keeps on growing. There are now more Americans working for government at all levels than in manufacturing. American companies spend 1 billion hours a year filling out government forms. We all complain about Congress, but for some reason we put our congressman back in power if he can deliver pork to our district. Government employees get $4 in salary increases for every dollar pay raise received by workers in the private sector. Salaries of federal civil employees are 26% higher than the salaries in the private sector. If fringe benefits are included, the federal employee's average income is $46,164, or 45% more than the income of average workers in private industry. If you include the extra vacation time and days off given to federal workers, the compensation is 64% higher than people who work in the private sector. In addition, the U.S. government has an overhead cost of $120,000 for each federal employee. No wonder the cost of government keeps going up. Now let's talk for a minute about the contract with America. The latest polls show that the American people like the Republican contract with America, but don't really understand it. 72% of the American people say they don't know anything about the contract with America. We have an obligation to make sure that everybody's fully informed. The people now trust the Republicans more than they trust President Clinton to make good decisions on major social issues. There is broad support for significant change in limiting the welfare system and balancing the budget. 2/3 of the people favor prayer in the public school, but get this, the same number don't want to change the Constitution to allow it. 87% of the people believe that welfare recipients should be required to work. 81% of the people favor a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, but that number drops to 41% if it requires any sacrifice by the American people. Can't have it both ways, folks. It then drops to 30% if the cuts were required in Social Security, and to 27% if cuts were required to Medicare. In summary, if you believe the study, the American people want a balanced budget, but they don't want to pay for it. We cannot have it both ways. We are spending our children's money. If these polls are accurate, the first 100 days in Congress won't be pretty. Now, the Republican governors want major programs turned over to the state. 3 Republican governors are leading the charge: John Engler from Michigan, Tom Thompson from Wisconsin, and William Weld from Massachusetts. They're leading the effort to have major welfare programs turned over to the states. They want to put an end to requirements that Washington must approve the state's welfare plans. The states want the power to design the welfare programs and vary them in different parts of their states to meet specific needs. The governors want to get rid of the requirement that the states have to contribute money to the programs, and they want the states to be able to share any savings produced by better management of money spent in Washington. The governors are very emphatic that the federal government should not reduce funding and pass the burden to the states. The states will accept financial accountability and auditing from Washington, but they want complete flexibility on the design and implementation of the programs. That's an interesting idea. It brings the solution close to the problem and allows the program to be modified by each area. The governors understand that one shoe will not fit every foot. Washington still thinks it will. Now then, we also have another little summary here. We've discussed the tax cut for the middle class, the contract with America, the runaway tax costs of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and continued government growth. Let's try to draw some conclusions. First, the 1993 tax increase, the largest in our country's history, drew rave reviews from the media, even though it didn't cut spending, never balanced the budget, and never balanced the budget, and forecast a deficit increase to $350 billion by the year 2004. Why was the media so excited about this? I don't know. Now, less than 2 years later, the same people who declared the tax increase a brilliant move are back claiming that taxes should be cut. What happened in the economy that would cause them to quickly reverse course 180 degrees? Nothing. It's all driven by politics. The Democrats lost the vote in '94. They're trying desperately to buy back the middle-class independent vote with a small tax cut spread out over 5 years. They don't tell you the 5-year part. In addition, they have no plan to cut the spending, so the deficit will increase. The strangest part is they're doing this right after really damaging the earning power of the middle-class worker by passing NAFTA and GATT, which moved millions of good-paying jobs overseas, or will move millions of good-paying jobs overseas in the next 5 to 10 years. They haven't figured out that if you lose your job, you can't pay taxes, and a tax cut is the least of your concerns. Washington, watch my lips. People who don't have a job, don't pay taxes, they do require welfare, they don't make any Social Security payments, and a heavier tax burden must be placed on workers who still have jobs to offset the tax loss, Social Security payment loss, and make the increased welfare payments. Washington obviously thinks we're too dumb to understand what's going on. The whole purpose of this program is to make sure that every working American fully understands what's going on and cannot be manipulated by the latest distorted messages coming out of Washington. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of or read a single news story asking why a tax increase in '93 could have been such a great idea and a tax cut in '94 could also be a great idea? The real solution to our country's financial problems is to have a strong, growing middle class. This will require a growing, expanding job base. This automatically provides a growing, expanded tax base. Then, if we would impose discipline on federal spending, we could balance the budget and pay off our debt. The point is simple. Washington is not approaching this problem in a way that will produce the desired results because it is driven by short-term political thinking. It is not driven by the one thing it should be driven by, and that is what is in the best interest of this great country. Washington treats these problems of trade, jobs, taxes, and investing money as if they were unrelated. In fact, they're all intertwined like the pieces of a complex puzzle. They must be considered together, not separately, if we want to develop workable solutions. Politics cannot drive this agenda because all of the solutions will require sacrifice, and that is the last thing people running for public office want to talk about. Conclusion, the American people will have to carry the flag and lead the charge on these vital economic issues. We've got to get organized in every neighborhood across the country so that your voices will be heard. In plain talk, Washington is promising the people free candy to get your vote in '96. Folks, there's no free candy. We all know that, and we must make it clear to Washington that we're insulted that they assume we are this dumb.
We'll be back after these words from your local stations.
Okay, well, we're back on another break now, and we're going through a lot of information, which is our style in this program. I'll be very interested in your comments on the format of the program. And please do write us at Post Office Box 10, Dallas, Texas, 75221. We very carefully go through each of your letters to get the good ideas. The principal complaint we've had on our show so far is that it's too short. Most radio shows are 2 hours. We wanted to start short, get it debugged, get it just right, find out exactly what the audience likes and doesn't like, and then, if it makes sense, we'll consider expanding it. So that's sort of the philosophy we're taking here.
They're all 2-minute breaks, so yeah, about 90 seconds.
The next thing we'll bring up is the war in Russia. As all of you may know, they had a deadline that expired this afternoon, and now the war has started, the bombing has started, and it's sad, it's unfortunate, but it's underway, and I'll be describing that to you in a minute. But when I come back on, I'll take some calls before I pick up another subject, because the fun part always is the folks that call in.
He's all set.
Okay. We've got Dave from Modesto, California coming in. Wants to talk about the flat tax. And that's an interesting and innovative idea, because one of the things we need to do is replace our income tax system with one that is a fair system. and one that requires a lot less paperwork. So this is an interesting concept. Not saying it's the answer, but it's one that we ought to brainstorm, and maybe it'll lead us to the right answer.
10 seconds. Stand by.
Okay.
Independent sector and the Ad Council.
And now let's go to Dave in Modesto, California. Hi, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
All right. Yeah, I'm calling about Congressman Dick Armey's flat tax proposal. It's House Resolution 4585. A friend of mine from here in Modesto called Senator or Congressman Armey's office, and he sent him the summary of it, and it is absolutely fascinating, sir. And the thing that really draws me to it is something that Congressman Armey asked us to consider, and that is that in America today, more people work for the government than are employed in manufacturing. Now, that bears on the GATT issue, too. But the some of the proposals, it's more than just a flat tax, which would allow us to pay our taxes by filling out a postcard-sized form, but it also talks about protecting private property rights, which is an incredibly serious problem here in California, and it requires the national risk assessment that forces Congress to determine the cost, benefits, and risks of all new regulations before it imposes new costs on the economy. Now, that provision is something that my Congressman, Democrat Gary Condit from here in the 18th District, I believe he supports. I'm pretty sure he does, and especially the protecting private property rights.
No, it's a creative idea. We need ideas like this on the table. I think it's premature to say that it's the ultimate solution, but it does accomplish a lot of things. We all want a tax system that's paperless. We want a tax system that's fair. It's got to get through those filters and several others, but we really should consider revising our tax system at this point in time. Congressman Armey, I think, has done the country a good service by bringing this one up, and it will produce a firestorm of debate. You can guarantee that. Let's go to Kelly in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Hi, Ross. Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Merry Christmas.
Talk about. Do you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the ceiling on the national debt. This summer, Congress is going to be faced with the embarrassing need to raise the ceiling again.
I don't think that's a problem for them. They'll just do it, don't you?
I don't know. Remember the last time they did it right after the infamous economic plan battle?
Right.
They did it very quietly, but with full collusion between both parties. No one knew they'd done it.
Oh, no, but I think it's safe to say they'll do it. And but thanks for running up the red flare. Now then, let's go to our next topic, and this is the war in Russia. Russia is at war with one of its republics, Chechnya. Where is Chechnya? It's in the southern part of Russia near the Black Sea in the same area as the Ukraine and Georgia. Chechnya has been a symbol of defiance against Russia for more than 300 years. The North Caucasus region, where Chechnya is located, is vital to the defense of Russia. Chechnya is oil rich. In the past several years, Western oil companies have signed contracts to invest $800 million in this area. Chechnya processes 12 million tons of crude oil a year. Russian troops have already been ordered to seize control of all oil refining sites and pipelines. The oil pipelines for southern Russia will have to go through Chechnya. Chechnya has a population of 1.3 million. Its people are known for their strong loyalty to their families, a strong sense of personal honor, their long-lasting blood feuds. They're a proud, freedom-loving people with a taste for anarchy. They're also considered good at business and bargaining, and they're a cunning and mysterious people. Tolstoy described the Chechyans as wild, aggressive people who love to fight, to live independently, and who have little love for Russia. It took Russia nearly 50 years to conquer this area. Most of the Chechen population was deported when Stalin accused them of cooperating with Nazi Germany during World War II. 3 years ago, Chechnya declared its independence. At that time, in '91, Yeltsin ordered military action against Chechnya, but the Russian parliament stopped him. They continued to demand their independence. This week, the fighting intensified in Chechnya. Hundreds of Russian tanks rolled across the border into the country, setting off a major international political crisis in Russia. Approximately 40,000 Russian troops are involved. Russia has sent helicopters, personnel carriers, and other heavy armaments to the region. The Chechen army is led by a former Russian Air Force general. This week, a Russian helicopter has been shot down. The crew was killed on the ground. 30 Russian armored vehicles have been set on fire. 10 Russian soldiers were killed this week, and at least 14 were wounded. The Chechens are holding 60 Russian POWs. Friday, a Russian general leading a tank division halted his advance and said, "It is forbidden to use the army against peaceful civilians." Probably got in serious trouble for that. It's believed that Chechen army consists of about 12,000 troops, but virtually every family is armed with semi-automatic weapons that are sold openly in the markets. They buy them from Russian soldiers for 1 bottle of vodka. That's the going rate. The military operation seems to be taken from the old Soviet textbooks in terms of how the Russians are going to do it. Fighting is now concentrated near Grozny, a city of 400,000 people. Vice President Gore and Defense Secretary William Perry are in Russia this week. Vice President Gore was asked by Chechnya to mediate a settlement, but declined to get involved in an internal Russian matter. Conflict erupted on the first anniversary of the new Russian Constitution. The Russian Parliament just passed a resolution by a vote of 289 to 4 that criticized any use of Russian armed forces against Chechnya. But they did not demand that Mr. Yeltsin withdraw the troops. He pulled back 3 years ago in the first military effort. He does not want to pull back again because it would destroy Yeltsin's authority and undermine the weakness of the Russian central government. The battle is portrayed by Russians as a fight for national unity and a struggle against chaos and crime. Russia has declared a truce in an effort to work out a peaceful settlement. That truce expired today at 4 o'clock. They are now at war. They're bombing tonight. Bringing order to Chechnya will make it clear to all the other republics that Moscow will not accept independence. Russia now has a problem well known to American troops in Vietnam and Somalia. It's easy to get in, it's hard to get out, especially if the population is stubborn. The Russians can kill us, but they cannot conquer us, said one Chechen. If the Russians come, they must come in over our corpses, he continued. The Chechen foreign minister said, there are more than 1 million of us, and we are ready to fight.
We'll be back after these words on Ross Perot, Listening to America.
Homeowners, if
There is very serious. These are very tough, proud people. They're in a mountainous area. It will be somewhat like the Russian experience in Afghanistan a few years ago. It's very difficult to conquer guerrillas. We had that experience in Vietnam, where they were in a tough geographic area. The topography was very difficult, and it's just tough to bring it to a stop. It will be interesting to see how this one unfolds. It has produced a great deal of stress between the United States and Russia, and that's sad because we had all hoped that we could have a strong friendship built over a period of years, and that Russia would succeed in its effort to become a democratic country. So we want to watch that one very closely. We have two situations now. The other's Bosnia. It's still boiling. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. We'll take some calls first. But just remember, as we discuss these things, that huge wars start in odd places. World War I started in Austria, of all places. And Europe can become a powder keg. We certainly hope it will not. We certainly hope that Russia will succeed in its efforts to build a democratic society. It's going through a very difficult period. It's a very difficult time for the Russian people. And hope they turn the corner pretty soon, and I hope there are constructive things that we can do to help them. When we come back, we'll be talking to Jim in Ravenna, Ohio. And he wants to talk about aid to Russia, so he's right on target.
That's right.
Sometimes it's hard to keep the...
Stand by.
Now we'll go to Jim in Ravenna, Ohio. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Ross. How are you tonight?
Great.
I noticed in the Christian Science Monitor a couple of weeks ago that Russia's providing $1 billion a year in military aid to Iran, and there are 2 U.S. laws on the books that forbid us to provide foreign aid to any country that supplies weapons to terrorists. Why are we providing this aid? Why is Washington thumbing its nose at the law?
Who knows? When it gets into the State Department's operations and how we give foreign aid, there's a lot to wonder about, and it's hard to understand. In all candor, there's no way in the world I could explain it to you because it doesn't make sense to me. Brian in Long Beach, California. How are you?
Oh, great, Ross. How are you doing today?
Fine.
Good. My question is, do you feel that we should go in and support the UN by taking over the operations there with NATO forces so that we can kind of keep peace in the area and settle things down, and at least get the people that work with the UN out of there and let the diplomats take over?
Brian, you have asked a question that is the next subject we're going to bring up, and I'll just get into it right now because it's an ever-changing subject, the subject of Bosnia. Last week, France announced that it had asked the UN and NATO to develop a plan to withdraw UN troops from Bosnia. 1 week later, France reversed its position. France now says it will not only keep its soldiers in Bosnia, but it will expand their mission. The French defense minister said, "My government does not wish to see this withdrawal take place. It would undermine the credibility of international organizations, namely the UN and NATO." Great Britain declined to support France in expanding the mission. France may have been sending a signal to Washington not to take the French efforts for granted. France says that the peacekeeping mission must be made more credible by demonstrating that it was not operating at the whim of the Serbs. Secretary of Defense Perry said the United Nations should expand the size of its forces, equip it with heavier arms, operate under more liberal rules of engagement. He said Washington would be willing to use American air power to help protect UN relief convoys. The French Minister of Defense now says he would only recommend withdrawal on 2 conditions. One, if the American Congress voted to lift the arms embargo, this would allow weapons to be sold to the Muslims, and if peacekeeping troops became totally ineffective. The French defense minister is pressing the United States to determine if President Clinton will veto legislation calling for lifting the arms embargo that would allow arms to be sold to the Muslims. This is a matter now being discussed in our Congress. Conclusion. Looks like France has the U.S. dancing to their tune. Last week, when they said they would withdraw, President Clinton immediately responded by offering to send in 25,000 troops to help enforce a peaceful settlement and help the Western countries evacuate their troops if they decided to leave. Now we must comply with their demands if we want them to stay. The top generals of the Western nations and UN commanders will hold a meeting next week in The Hague to discuss Bosnia. The purpose of the meeting is to develop a plan that will allow UN forces to do a better job. NATO officials say they will keep in place the arrangement by which both UN officials and NATO officials must pre-approve NATO airstrikes. The latest event is former President Jimmy Carter will try to negotiate a truce at the request of the Bosnian Serb leader. President Clinton has neither endorsed or objected to former President Carter's efforts. The British, the French, the United Nations, and NATO have expressed serious concerns about Carter's involvement. And that is a lot on Bosnia, but that's where human lives are at stake. And now then, let's go to Tony in Panama City, Florida. How are you, Tony?
Hi, Ross. Good talking to you, sir. The military question continues here. Now we're talking about going back to Somalia to pull a Dunkirk there. We're going to do a Dunkirk evacuation in Bosnia. You know, we got to get some accountability in our government. The president's operating out of control, and the Congress doesn't seem to be doing anything about it.
Okay, interesting point, and you would think we would have learned our lesson in Somalia, but the word is out. We are considering going back in, and it will be interesting to see how all of that unwinds over the next few days. The last thing we need is to have to fight on too many fronts at once or get involved in too many areas at once. Let's go to Eunice in Baltimore, Maryland. How are you, Eunice?
I'm fine, Ross. Nice talking to you. I'm glad to see you have this show. We need somebody like you.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk about entitlements, especially the pensions. I know the congressmen are always talking about entitlements that the American public are getting, but they never address their entitlements, like their pensions with the COLA. Do you think it's fair that the government should have a COLA to pensions when the private sector doesn't?
I think the government pensions are through the roof. You've seen what some of these congressmen are eligible for. Over 93 members of Congress are eligible for individual pension funds worth over $2 million apiece. I don't know anybody in the private sector except a few CEOs that have pension funds that big. No, it's a bad joke. Folks, we are having a really active program tonight. Call us at 1-800-44-PEROT, P-E-R-O-T, or 1-800-447-3768. And let us hear from you. And now we'll go to the Cuban refugee update. You remember the 8,500 Cuban refugees that were detained in Panama that rioted last week? There are only 3 months left on our agreement that allows us to keep these Cubans in Panama. The U.S. General James Wilson said, these are well-educated, decent people. They just want to get on with their lives. The Cubans risked their lives at sea when they fled Cuba. It would require force to get them to go back to Guantanamo Bay, said another American official. That won't be pretty. Another U.S. official said that it is not realistic to send the 8,500 refugees from Panama into the U.S. because there are 22,000 more Cuban refugees in military camps at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, at our naval base. The official said, we're not talking about 8,500 people, we're talking about 30,000 people. If any concessions are made for the 8,500 Cuban refugees in Panama, the other 22,000 in Guantanamo Bay would be encouraged to riot to achieve the same benefits. That is a risk we just cannot take. And now, on to Chile, our newest member of NAFTA. Chile is being admitted as the 4th member of NAFTA. It is considered by Washington to be a risk-free way of setting the precedent for expanding NAFTA because Chile is a very small country with a population of only 13 million people, a gross national product of $43 billion. That's smaller than the annual sales of IBM Corporation. Chile is regarded as a progressive South American country because it has privatized all but 50 of its 500 state-owned companies and has welcomed foreign investment. Other South American and Caribbean countries are complaining. The trade agreements just keep pouring in. It's all about cheap labor and making bigger profits. The middle-class U.S. worker will pay the price. Advice to Washington, if you really care about the American worker, stop shipping our jobs overseas. At this point, our government has completed trade agreements in every place on the planet. It looks like we're going to have to revitalize NASA so they can start going to Venus, Mars, and the moon. Maybe their new theme song should be, Fly Me to the Moon.
We'll be back after these words from your local stations.
Okay, this is our last segment.
And we'll be off the air in what time?
Well, you've got five
5 minutes.
left.
I got it. I
Okay.
got it. Fine.
So
Now,
I don't know if you want her to move ahead after this to the closing story, or
let's see what we have. We'll have about how much when we come back in? 4 minutes?
yes.
We may have to go from when I tell you where I am, when I signal you, take me straight to the closing story. We'll do that with a little under 2 minutes. But right now we can do Mexico. Let me look at what I've got here. All you C-SPAN viewers, bear with me here a minute.
Production in progress.
This is radio.
That's right.
Safety belts save lives. Thanks for helping me, pal.
Vince, don't thank me. Thank your sister.
But Larry, I don't have a sister. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the Department of Transportation.
Well, we don't want to go there yet.
Okay. 1 minute. 1 minute.
Country's armed forces, including the United
Got the
States
clock.
Air Force.
Time left.
Okay.
These halls represent the enormous investment made by Americans over the last 4
Thanks,
decades
Allison.
to the preservation of freedom.
Thank you, Allison.
Our changing world is proof the investment paid off. The Air Force is
I'm
changing too. When the Cold War began, we were airlifting food and supplies to a West Berlin blockaded by Soviet troops.
Give me a 2 when we're down to
Today,
2.
we're carrying aid into the free Soviet republics. These changing times dictate a smaller Air Force, but it doesn't.
This 4 minutes is airtime, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
Under
great.
4 now.
For a
Great.
challenge. We have jobs available now with high-tech training and experience you can't find anywhere else. The Air Force is getting smaller.
All right.
But the benefits
Y'all be
and
alert because I'm going to have to spin down to...
opportunities are as big as ever. Call 1-800-423-USAF. Aim high. Air Force.
Our next subject is cocaine dealing in Mexico. Juan Garcia is Mexico's biggest cocaine smuggler. He's smuggling between $10 and $20 billion a year into the United States. Mexico is turning into another Colombia as the Colombian drug lords alter their routes from the Caribbean to take advantage of the 2,000-mile border between Mexico and the United States. According to our drug enforcement agency, the Garcia cartel is organized crime at its best, and by that they mean at its worst. In terms of its effectiveness, it pays millions of dollars in bribes each year to Mexican officials. One Mexican official alone was caught with $1.5 million in cash. The Garcia organization started years ago as a small family operation smuggling liquor into the United States during Prohibition. Today, it's one of the biggest businesses in Mexico. Money's been laundered through some of our major financial institutions. For example, American Express International has agreed to $36 million settlement with the Justice Department and a $7 million fine, the largest ever imposed against a U.S. financial institution. Other banks and brokerage firms are now being investigated. A defense attorney for the banks has been quoted as saying that this is one of the most violent and bloodthirsty commercial enterprises ever to disgrace the Western Hemisphere. Who gets hurt? Our children gets hurt. That's who gets hurt. Now let's look at drug use among children. Marijuana use has been dropping, but now it's going up quickly. For example, between 1993 and 94, it increased 50% among 8th graders, it increased 30% among 10th graders, and 40% among our 12th graders. It's up to the parents to get that stopped. And now, let's honor one of our great people in the United States. We always like to close on a positive note. Tonight I'd like to talk about a lovely lady named Lynn Porter from Clinton, Mississippi. She was driving to work when she noticed that the driver in the car ahead of her was leaning across the front seat. It looked as if he were bending over to pick something up, but he never straightened up. She was horrified as she watched the car drift around the road. Suddenly she decided, this man is having a heart attack. Lynn stopped her car, leaped out, sprinted down the street after the weaving vehicle. When she finally caught up with it, the car was headed into a busy intersection. Automobiles screeched to a halt on every side. They barely missed Lynn. Believe it or not, Lynn yanked the door open, shoved the driver away from the steering wheel, grabbed the car wheel, got inside, and with her feet dragging the pavement, finally put the car in park. She said, I don't know how I managed to do that, but to make a long story short, she did it. The man was slumped over on the front seat. His lips had turned blue. He wasn't breathing. Lynn jumped out of the car, calling for help, and waved her arms. Mark Gallagher, a passing motorist, came in and began administering CPR. Lynn dashed across the street and telephoned 911. Howard Taylor, an off-duty firefighter, raced to the stricken man and put this man back into a better condition. After the paramedics arrived and put him into an ambulance, Lynn walked back to her car. The rubber soles of her sneakers were completely in shreds. She did a great job. She is our hero of the week. Lynn, we honor you. You represent the best of America. You gave your life for a man you did not know.
You have been listening to Ross Perot, Listening to America, brought to you in part by FSG International for all your commodity trading needs. Our engineer tonight has been Larry Glazier, producer Anne-Marie Petito, production engineer Marilyn Miller, and executive producer Christopher Bly. If you would like to write to Ross, send your letters to Post Office Box 10,
Tune in every
Dallas,
Sunday night,
Texas,
if you will.
75221.
We're around
This
the
has been a
country,
production of
covered
Tribune
across
Radio
the country, and all the big Clear Channel stations that carry us, so they have tremendous range, and a lot of the local stations, but we blanket the United States. We're also on shortwave and cover most of the world. Let us know how we can do a better job. Thank you very much.